Mademoiselle Bardot, I'm told you'll be speaking English in this film. Sir Alexander Korda held up the script in his hand. Around the table, several actors looked up from their pages. We should probably test that before cameras start rolling, he added. A few quiet chuckles moved down the table. Brigitte Bardot did not open her script. All eyes turned toward her. 15 cast members occupied wooden chairs along both sides of the table. Their scripts opened to different pages, some with pens in hand, others with pencils resting on highlighted sections of dialogue. 8 crew members stood behind the seated actors in a loose semicircle, their positions creating a second row of witnesses, sound technicians, lighting operators, assistant directors, all watching the exchange at the head of the table. 3 studio executives sat at the far end of the table in high-backed leather chairs beside the director, their dark suits contrasting with the lighter clothing of the cast, their faces turned toward Korda's position. Korda's script had colored tabs protruding from multiple pages, red tabs marking dialogue scenes, yellow tabs indicating action sequences, green markers denoting location changes, the rainbow of organizational tools creating a visual index along the manuscript's edge. The soundstage lights created bright pools of white illumination above the table, the overhead fixtures mounted on a grid system 30 feet above the floor, their beams cutting through the darker surrounding space. Bardot's hands remained motionless on her closed script, her shoulders square to the table edge, her spine straight against the chair back. The director sat to Korda's right in a matching wooden chair, his own script open to page 1 with a fountain pen positioned horizontally across the top margin, the silver cap catching light from the overhead spots. Cast members glanced from Korda to Bardot and back, their eyes moving in quick shifts, their heads turning in small increments left and right. The crew members shifted their weight from foot to foot but maintained their positions behind the seated actors, their arms crossed or hands clasped in front of their bodies. If you're interested in untold stories from cinema's golden age, subscribe now. This is a fictionalized dramatization inspired by real public figures and historical settings. It does not depict a documented event. The director cleared his throat, a deliberate sound that drew attention, and addressed the table with his eyes scanning the assembled cast from left to right. This is Miss Bardot's first major English-language production. He gestured toward the assembled cast with his left hand, his palm open and facing upward, his arm extending in a sweeping motion that encompassed the entire table. His right hand remained on his script, fingers splayed across the open pages. We've seen French actors struggle with English dialogue before, the director continued, his voice dropping slightly in volume, creating an intimate tone that required the witnesses to lean forward to hear clearly. Korda nodded in agreement, his head bobbing twice in quick succession, his chin dipping toward his chest and rising again. The pronunciation challenges can delay production significantly. The word significantly carried extra emphasis, the syllables separated and extended. Korda lifted his script higher until it reached eye level, his arms bending at the elbows to raise the pages 12 inches from their previous position. This film has a £2 million budget, he said, the numbers articulated with precision, each digit given equal weight. The numbers hung in the air for 3 seconds, 1, 2, 3, with no one speaking, no chairs moving, no scripts turning. Perfect English delivery is non-negotiable, Korda added, his free hand making a chopping motion through the air to emphasize the finality of the statement, his palm moving in a sharp horizontal line. The 3 executives at the end of the table leaned forward in their chairs, their upper bodies tilting at 15-degree angles, their elbows coming to rest on the table surface. Their eyes fixed on Bardot's position at the center of the table, 3 sets of pupils tracking to the same focal point. Cast members glanced at each other across the table, eye contact being made and broken in rapid succession. Actress to actor to actress, diagonal looks crossing the center line. One actress near the end closed her script with a soft thump, the cover meeting the pages, and set her hands on top in a folded position, fingers interlaced. Bardot's script remained closed, her fingers now gripping the edges with visible pressure, the tips of her fingers creating small indentations in the leather cover. Korda opened his script to a page marked with a red tab, his thumb finding the colored marker and pulling the pages open to reveal a full scene of dialogue with multiple character names in the left margin. "Let me demonstrate the concern," he said, his eyes scanning the page for 3 seconds before he began. He read a line from the marked page in deliberately exaggerated French-accented English, his voice emphasizing each mispronounced consonant. Th sounds becoming Z, R sounds rolling with guttural force, vowels shifting to nasal tones, the performance a caricature of pronunciation errors. "You see the problem," Korda said, closing his script partway so that 50 pages remained visible between the covers, his thumb marking his place. The room went quiet, conversations ceased, breathing became shallow, the ambient hum of the soundstage equipment the only sound. Cast members stopped their glancing and faced forward, their bodies realigning to look toward the head of the table, their scripts now motionless on the wooden surface. "I've already contacted a dialect coach," Korda announced, his voice returning to normal volume and tone. The exaggerated accent dropped completely. "Sessions can begin tomorrow morning before any scenes are shot." His hand moved to adjust his wire-rimmed glasses, his right index finger pushing the bridge upward on his nose, the metal frame shifting position and catching light. The three studio executives shifted in their chairs, the leather creaking under redistributed weight, their bodies moving in near synchronization. One executive checked his wristwatch with an obvious downward glance, his left wrist rotating to bring the watch face into view, his eyes focusing on the dial for 2 full seconds. Another executive opened a scheduling folder on the table in front of him, the manila cover lifting to reveal typed pages with dates and times listed in columns. An executive near the end stood up, his chair scraping backward against the concrete floor with a prolonged grinding sound, his hands pressing on the armrests for leverage. "The production is already 3 days behind schedule," he said, his voice rising to carry the length of the table, the words traveling 20 feet from his position to Korda's. His voice carried clearly across the soundstage, bouncing off the high ceiling and returning as a faint echo. "We cannot afford coaching delays." The final word dropped in pitch, emphasizing the financial concern. A cast member in the middle section raised his hand slightly, his elbow remaining on the table while his forearm lifted 6 inches, his fingers extended upward. Perhaps Miss Bardot should attempt the reading first. His suggestion created a brief pause, 2 seconds of silence before the next sound occurred. Korda's hand came down sharply on the table, his palm making flat contact with the wood surface, the impact creating a sharp crack that echoed across the soundstage. "The decision is final," Korda said, his palm remaining pressed against the table for emphasis, his fingers spread wide, the sound of the impact still reverberating in the large space. The sound echoed across the soundstage, traveling to the walls 60 feet away and returning as diminished repetitions. Crew members behind the table stopped their whispered conversations, mouths closing mid-sentence, heads turning toward the source of the sound. All eyes turned toward Bardot, every face at the table rotating to look at her position, every pair of eyes in the room focusing on the center chair. Her hands released the edges of her closed script, her fingers lifting away from the leather cover and moving to rest on the table surface beside the manuscript. The director shifted in his chair, the wooden legs scraping against the floor with a brief stuttering sound, his body weight redistributing. One crew member crossed his arms over his chest, his hands gripping opposite biceps, his posture closing. Another adjusted the position of a standing light fixture behind the table, his hands turning the metal stem to redirect the beam, but his eyes remained fixed on the table, his gaze never leaving Bardot's position. The executives remained standing at the far end, their bodies frozen in position, their folders and watches forgotten. Bardot's right hand moved to the front cover of her script with deliberate slowness, her arm extending across the table surface, her fingers traveling the 6 inches from resting position to the manuscript's edge. Her fingers found the edge of the leather cover and began to lift, the material rising away from the pages beneath, revealing the title page with "Untitled Project, First Draft," typed in capital letters. The script opened to reveal pages marked with handwritten notes in the margins, blue ink annotations, underlined phrases, circled words, evidence of preparation. Bardot stood from her chair, the wooden legs scraping backward against the concrete floor with a sustained scraping sound that lasted 3 seconds, the rubber feet dragging across the rough surface. No one moved. 15 cast members remained seated with hands on their scripts. 8 crew members stood frozen behind the chairs. 3 executives held their positions at the table's end. Her left hand flipped through pages in rapid succession, the paper making soft rustling sounds, each page turning, creating a whisper of movement, until she reached a section marked with a folded corner, the page tip bent down to create a triangular marker. She opened the script to the marked page and held it at chest height in her left hand, her arm bent at the elbow, the manuscript positioned 12 inches from her body. Her right hand steadied the pages, her fingers pressing against the right edge to prevent movement, her thumb marking a position 3/4 through the scene. She began reading a dramatic monologue, her lips forming the first word, her voice emerging clear and strong. The words came out in fluent English, every consonant clear and distinct, every vowel properly shaped with lips and tongue in precise positions, the rhythm natural and unforced, matching the cadence of a native speaker. Bardot's voice filled the soundstage for 2 full minutes without pause or hesitation, the monologue progressing from opening line through character development to emotional climax, 120 seconds of continuous dialogue. The pronunciation carried no trace of accent interference, no rolled R's, no softened consonants, no vowel shifts, each phoneme produced with BBC standard precision. Korda's mouth opened slightly, his lips parting to create a gap between upper and lower teeth, his jaw dropping half an inch from its previous position. His script lowered 6 inches from its previous position at eye level, his arms bending at different angles, the pages now positioned at chin height. The cast members sat frozen in their chairs, their bodies motionless, hands still resting on their own scripts, eyes fixed on Bardot's standing figure. Crew members behind the table stopped all movement. Arms remained crossed or at sides, weight stayed distributed on both feet, heads held at fixed angles. The 3 executives remained standing, but their hands dropped to their sides, releasing folders and abandoning watches, arms hanging loose at hip level. 5 seconds passed. The overhead lights hummed with electrical current, the only sound besides Bardot's voice. Bardot continued reading, her voice steady and controlled, the English dialogue flowing without interruption or correction, line following line in the scripted sequence. Korda's eyes remained fixed on her position, his gaze unblinking, his pupils tracking her mouth movements as she formed each word. 10 seconds passed. The soundstage air remained still, no movement creating drafts or disturbances. Cast members turned their heads from Bardot to Korda in slow synchronized movement, 15 pairs of eyes executing the same motion at the same speed, their necks rotating like mechanisms on a single control. Their eyes tracked from the center of the table to the head position, pupils moving left or right depending on seating location, all converging on Korda's face. The director's pen remained unmoved on his open script, the fountain pen still horizontal across the top margin, the silver cap reflecting light in an unchanged position. Bardot finished the final line of the monologue, her voice delivering the last word with proper emphasis, the syllables fading into silence. The last word hung in the air, forever, the second syllable extending and then cutting off cleanly. 15 seconds passed. Her script stayed open in her hands, held at chest height, her arms maintaining their bent position, her fingers still marking the page. Korda's script closed with an audible thump, the front cover meeting the back cover, the pages compressing between them, the colored tabs folding and creasing. He turned to his left where an assistant stood against the wall holding a clipboard with scheduling papers attached, the young man's eyes wide and fixed on the scene. "Cancel the accent coach appointment," Korda said, his voice flat and without inflection, the words a simple instruction requiring no response. The director stood from his chair with a quick upward motion, his script gripped in his right hand, his left hand pressing against the table edge for leverage. "We'll begin blocking the first scene immediately," he announced to the table, his voice carrying the tone of resumed authority, the pitch and volume matching his earlier instructions. His free hand gestured toward the soundstage floor beyond the table, indicating the performance space where actors would mark positions. Cast members opened their scripts to the starting page, the sound of turning pages creating a rustling chorus across the table, 15 people flipping paper in near unison, the whisper of movement building to audible volume. The 3 executives sat back down in their chairs with synchronized movements, their bodies lowering into the leather seats, their hands returning to rest on the table surface. Crew members moved toward their equipment stations positioned around the soundstage perimeter, their footsteps creating a pattern of sound across the concrete floor, rubber soles, leather heels, boots with thick treads, each person walking at different speeds toward different destinations, the collective movement breaking the frozen tableau.